What's up, guys? Today I want to make an introduction for you, and that is an introduction to the Beyerdynamic DT 1990s. I've been excited to try these for quite a while now. I've been reading quite a bit about them. Recently I did a review on the DT 770s and really liked those headphones, so I was really excited to see what the flagship model would sound like there. In this video, we're going to talk two pieces. We're going to first look at what's in the box, and then we're going to talk about my impressions of them after I've had a chance to give them a good audition for about a week or so. Before I do that, I just want to introduce them a little bit to say this is Beyerdynamic's flagship headphone. They have kind of two tiers. They have the DT 770s, 880s, and 990s. Those are the kind of the entry level for sound engineers and people who work at mixing boards. And then they have the 1770s, and in this case the 1990s, which feature their specialized Tesla driver and an all steel and aluminum construction, as well as, I'm sure, a whole bunch of other differences that on the inside that we don't necessarily see. So with no further ado, let's get into opening the box here. All right, first thing we'll notice when we open the box is the hard case. Not sure how well the camera will pick it up, but in black, Beyerdynamic does have their logo on there. It's a nice looking case. This is a nice feature because the last pair of headphones that I had, they gave you any kind of hard clamshell type case like this were the V-Moda M100s. This is nice. I mean, these aren't extremely portable headphones, so they're not meant for that, but it's always great when you have a case that you can throw in a bag so you're not worried about your $600 headphones getting crushed. All right, so when we open it up, first thing you'll see is these very attractive looking headphones. Again, all metal construction. So you have a pleather headband here with ample amounts of padding on the underside. The entire construction of the headband and the connecting parts is all steel. And then the ear cups presumably are aluminum. Very elegant looking side piece here. Nice looking. Big visual difference from the DT 770s with plastic ear cups. These are a little weightier as a result. Hopefully that won't be too big of a difference when we do the listening auditions. Underneath that, we notice that they give you two extra ear cups. So from what I've read, the stock ear cups that come on the headphones are balanced. It's supposed to give you a more balanced response and a little bit more bass. These are the analytical ear cups that apparently are set up to bring out the mid detail and the upper end a little bit and less focus on the bass. Very nice that they give you two different ear pads that you can use. And then in this little zipper compartment up here, you have two different cords to choose from. So you have a straight cable that I have wound up a little bit here. On one end, your standard 3.5 millimeter plug. On the other end, mini XLR 3-pole. And this is the part that goes into the headphones. And then you also have your choice of a coiled cable. Now this is a little weightier here, but what's nice about this is it's only about 3 feet long total instead of probably 8 or 10 feet long like the other one. So if you're sitting at a desk and you don't need a whole bunch of extra wire laying around, this might be a good alternative for you. And I really like the fact that Beyerdynamic gives you these options right in the box here. You've got two different choices of ear pads, and you've got two different choices of cables, and of course, the adapter to 1/4 inch for each of your cables. All right, guys, I have been using the DT 1990 for about a week, so I'm ready to talk about them. I feel like to say that these are the clearest and most resolving mids I've probably ever heard in a headphone is sort of a disservice to the rest of the range. You might hear that and think, oh, they're like mid-range cannons and they don't do anything else well. I find that these do the entire frequency range well. It's just that the last probably 3 or 4 headphones I've owned that I use with any regularity are all described as having kind of recessed mids. That's the Denon AHD 5000s. I've used the V-Moda M100s. I've recently used the Beyerdynamic DT 770s. Years back, I used the AKG K701s, which these kind of remind me of in some ways, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But These have a pretty neutral mid-range, and compared to a bunch of headphones with recessed mids, that creates a pretty different experience that actually took a little getting used to for me. The first probably half hour of listening to music on these, it was sort of a weird feeling for me of like, I like this sound, but there's something about it that I haven't made up my mind about yet. I want to just make it a point to say too that unlike some who review these high-end headphones, I have not had the honor to use $1,000 plus audiophile headphones such as the Sennheiser HD 800s that a lot of people consider to be one of the finest headphones in the world. So consider my viewpoint there. I've used probably 4 headphones that are at this $500-600 level in line with these. I've not used $1,500 headphones, so when I tell you these are the clearest mids I've ever heard, there's probably some people out there thinking, well, this headphone is better or that one's maybe. But at the $500 or $600 level, in my experience, these are as good as it gets for that kind of detail. The highs are bright, much like all of the Beyerdynamic headphones that I've tried, right around the 6 to 8 kilohertz range. They're pretty hot. And that was something that took a little getting used to. I'll say that at this point, after about a week of listening to them, I actually like the way that makes them sound. The detail and the brightness is something I've had on a lot of headphones before, so that wasn't super jarring to me, but it was a little grating on some songs early into my using them. I EQ'd them at first, probably like -3, 4, 5 decibels around the 8 kilohertz range to smoothen them out a little bit. I'm not doing that currently. A lot of people debate about whether burn-in is real or not. I mean, I don't know. I suppose if you believe that, then it's possible that over the course of a week, the burn-in caused these to smooth out. If you're a person who just believes that's a myth and it's all in your head, then it's entirely possible that over the course of a week, I just grew to get used to that sound and found it pleasant, where I had not at first. Your mileage may vary. If you're somebody who does not like bright headphones, I would probably not recommend these because they do have that bump there, although a few others that are a little bit more technically knowledgeable than I am have pointed out that to make headphones sound realistic, the way that we actually perceive instruments and sounds as they happen in the room around us, there does have to be a bit of a bump in the lower treble area, right around 6 to 8 kilohertz, to help create that effect. So that might have been part of why Beyerdynamic made the choice to give this kind of sound signature to these. I do find these to be very realistic sounding. You get the impression when you're listening to these that the instruments really are in the room with you. Like it gives it more of a live performance feel rather than simply saying this is a really high quality recording or reproduction like I felt in the past on a lot of headphones I've listened to. Part of that is probably that the last 3 headphones I've owned have been closed back, so even headphones like the Denon AHD 5000s and the DT 770s that people describe as having a really good soundstage for closed back, and that was my experience. These remind me a lot of the AKG K701s that I owned years ago. Those had a really nice soundstage. These remind me of that a lot in that regard, except to the 1990s credit, the bass is a lot more robust, whereas I did not feel that at all with the K701s. And I didn't, the soundstage in terms of where the instruments sounded like they were really good on the K701s, but I didn't get that impression as much that what I was listening to was like actually happening in the room with me. Where these, it almost kind of fakes me out at first when I listen to them, how much that's true. So take that for what you will. The bass on these I felt is fairly consistent with my experience from the DT 770s, which is to say it's less overtly in your face and powerful than some other headphones. The Denon AHD 5000s would be a good example of a headphone that just sounds overtly bassier right off the bat without EQ and whatnot. But what I find interesting about these is even though they're open back, they retain the ability to hit those really deep sub-bass frequencies just like the DT 770s do. And I was very impressed when I reviewed those headphones that they will go notably deeper than even my Denon headphones did. And the V-Moda M100s, a lot of people describe them as a bass headphone. And yet, compared to the DT770 and these, they just don't go anywhere near as deep, and it's muddier. So these give you a much cleaner bass presentation. It's a lot faster bass, which sounds great on music with a lot of instrumentation, or where the bass guitarist is doing a lot of intricate playing and whatnot. Really makes a difference there. And the fact that it will go all the way down to 20, 25 hertz well without tapering off a whole lot, you'd be surprised. If you haven't heard headphones that play that deep, which not all of them do, you'd be surprised what a difference that makes in how full and engaging music can sound. And that, I think, I compared these to the K701s a minute ago. That would be another distinction I think I would make between the two, would be to say that I found the K701s years ago a very analytical, a very detailed headphone, and I liked that about them, but it was kind of so much so that they had I would describe them as a clinical feel. The music wasn't fun. So they might be good headphones for mixing music or just a really analytical listen, but not really like the kind of music that you would bob your head to while you're listening to. These, on the other hand, give you every bit as much of that detail and soundstage, but they're fun to listen to. And for me, that's important. These headphones are often used by people in engineering studios to mix and master music. I imagine they would be great for that. Personally, that's not what I do for a living, but for just the kind of person who says, I work at a desk or something like that all day, I have a good headphone amp, and I like to jam to music, and I want it to sound awesome while I work, like I do, these are fantastic for that. The build quality is probably among the best I've ever had in headphones that I've owned. These are an all-metal construction. Makes them a little heavier than the DT770s, that it did have a metal headband, and the joiner piece here that holds the ear cup was metal or aluminum, but the ear cups themselves were plastic. These are aluminum all the way around. It makes them a little heavier, although the headband is nice and thick. The pleather here, the padding is really supple on the bottom. I don't find really any issues where that digs into my head. I'm a bald guy, so I don't have the benefit of hair like some people do. That makes a difference. If headphones don't have a good enough headband, someone like me would notice that in 25 minutes pretty easily. I don't notice a problem with that on these, which is nice. And the pads are pretty nice. This comes with 2 ear pads. The stock ones that come on it are what they call the balanced set, which supposedly brings out the bass more and gives it a more flat response. The analytical ones that are the secondary pair that it comes with here emphasize the bass less and are supposed to give you a little bit more mid-range presence and a little bit more treble. I used these briefly. They were okay. I didn't really care for them as much because, to me, even though I like bright headphones, these are already pretty bright as it is. I didn't really want something that kind of enhanced that strong mid any more than it was. And another thought that I would say about these is that powerful mid-range sometimes, to me, comes a little bit at the expense of the bass, which is to say, it's not that the bass is underrepresented, it's just that when there is so much other sound happening in greater frequency ranges to your ear, it makes maybe you focus on the bass less, or it just doesn't feel as pronounced. And I noticed that because when you hit a song that doesn't have as much high end and is just a bassy song, these carry it spectacularly. But on music, sometimes with heavy metal or orchestral pieces or stuff with a lot happening, the bass can use a little EQ, and that's with the balanced ear pads that have a little bit more bass response. So for me, I was kind of like, why would I want to put on earphones that dampen the bass even more? Even though these are a little bit squishier, they're a little bit more comfortable for some reason than the balanced ear pads, but ultimately I chose to keep those on there because I like the overall sound better. I would say that probably one of the only real faults I would find about these headphones, one of the things that could be better, is they have a lot more clamping force. Not a lot more, but a degree more than the DT770s. And sometimes that does cause a little discomfort, like around the sides of my head. The DT770s, I had a couple of days where I wore them pretty much for about 6.5 hours straight. and I didn't have any problems with comfort. They were among the most comfortable headphones I'd worn. These are pretty close, but that clamping force can, after an hour or two of wearing them, it does wear on me a little bit. I find if I take them off and just set them down for a few minutes, it tends to alleviate a lot of that. I'm hoping that with use, maybe stretching these out a little bit, it will reduce some of the clamping force, but that is something to be aware of. If you have a large head, that clamping force might be even more of an issue for you because they're stretched more to accommodate. Something to think about if you're considering these headphones. But that's really the main complaint about the build that I would have, is the clamping force. Everything else about them is very nice. They have a lot of swivel here to accommodate whatever shape you want. They twist a little bit to get the perfect fit on your head. I really like the detachable headphone concept. They're held in there very securely, almost too securely, to the degree that when I was going to switch the cable, it was actually kind of tricky because I pushed the little button in, but you have to pull harder than it feels like you probably expected you would to get it out. I was kind of afraid of breaking them when I was pulling it out. It did come out. Normally, I went into this thinking that I was going to prefer the straight cable that it came with, but since I'm often at a desk, this cable is like 8 or 10 feet long. It's so long that I have to constantly wind it up, and then it's spilling and falling all over the place. And if I'm ever in a scenario where I want to plug these into, say, my phone and walk around, this much cable is a little problematic. So I actually found that I prefer the coiled cable. It's heavier for sure. But if you're sitting on a desk and you're just letting it lay there, that's not a problem. And the coil ends up being maybe 3 feet. That's a lot less to manage for most settings than trying to deal with the straight cable. So that's nice that Beyerdynamic included 2 cables and 2 sets of ear pads so that you can customize them to whatever setup works good for you. And now that I mentioned the phone, I want to talk about powering these headphones. So people often ask, when you're talking about a 250 ohm pair of headphones, how hard are these going to be to power? Am I going to need a headphone amp? What kind of amp, etc.? I would say yes, generally speaking, you probably want a headphone amp with these. I did, just for curiosity, plug these into an iPad straight out of its headphone jack. Volume-wise, probably about 3/4 volume. It was sufficient. So in terms of sheer volume, it wasn't hard to drive, although the soundstage and the bass and everything was a bit flat, so you definitely lose out on that without a headphone amp. I have the LG V50 smartphone, which LG has often made phones that have a far superior headphone out and DAC in them to other phones. So if you have, say, a Samsung or something, you might find that it doesn't provide enough power. For my part, the V50 does a great job of amplifying these, actually. I find at about 40 or 50% volume. It gets plenty loud enough with a little EQ on the bass and whatnot. The sound is very full. The soundstage is almost as good as using my dedicated headphone amp at my desk. So I was pleasantly surprised by that, because I went into these thinking, well, these are not going to be mobile at all with my phone. I'm going to have to use like the DT770s when I want to be up and about. But actually, the phone does a great job in this case of powering these, so that's refreshing. At my desk, I use the Creative Sound Blaster X G6. That's an HD DAC with dedicated headphone out on it. You do need a little bit more volume on that to push these, although what's interesting is that headphone amp has the default low gain mode. It claims for headphones 150 ohms and down, and then it has a high gain mode for 150 and up. So I went into this thinking I was going to need the high gain mode, and I did briefly use it there, but I actually found that keeping it back on the default low gain mode, about 30 to 40% Windows volume through that headphone amp pushed these just fine. I wasn't finding an issue where I had to turn it like all the way up or anything. When I want quieter listening, 20% volume is fine with these. So with that as a headphone amp, it's actually pretty easy to drive these. I think that owes a lot to the Tesla driver that they had in these and the 102 decibel per 1 milliwatt sensitivity on these. It makes them, kind of despite being 250 ohms, relatively easy to drive, which is nice. Gives you a lot more flexibility of how you use them. I did plug them into a Harman Kardon HK3490 receiver as well. to listen to them. That was a good experience as well, using its DAC to listen to music. But I would say the bulk of my listening has been on that Sound Blaster X, and it's a great experience. FLAC music from Amazon Music sounds fantastic with these. These really do the detail that you get from that Justice. You feel like you're really hearing the benefit of a well-mastered, well-recorded, well-mixed album when you're listening to it, and you can really appreciate the work that went into it from the sound engineer standpoint. Really enjoy that on these. Not something I've noticed as much on some of the other headphones, and it's notable because the Denon D5000s that I've had for probably 11 years now, I have for a long time considered those to be, the Cadillac of headphones for me, one of the best that I had listened to. And when they were new, they were at a pretty similar price point to these actually, but I think these sound notably better than those. Like I said, a little bit less bass, but just so much better mids, so much better overall detail and transparency that it's just a much more natural sounding listening experience. It's great. I really can't say enough about that. Final thoughts to wrap up. I love these headphones. They sound great. If you don't like bright headphones, these may not be for you, but if you like a kind of V-shaped, fun and engaging headphone with lots of detail throughout this frequency, but like I said, especially in the mid-range, give these a try. I think you'll love them. I also really love the build quality. Everything about these, including the way that they look, is very elegant. It just has the feel of a very high-end headphone. They're very comfortable to wear. I really like that Beyerdynamic included the hard case with them. I haven't had an occasion yet to use that, to pack them in a bag and go out and about, but knowing that you can is great. The last headphones I had that feature were the V-Moda M100s. Definitely those are a more portable headphone than these, but it's nice to be able to pack up and go, and I love the fact that they gave you the 2 different ear pads and the 2 different cords. That's actually not a feature I've had with any headphones I've owned yet, so that's very nice. And I guess that's about it, guys. So thank you, Beyerdynamic, for making such a wonderful headphone, and thanks for listening to my review. I hope this was helpful for you if you're shopping around or thinking about these headphones or just wanted to compare them to a couple other kinds that you were thinking about or own. Join me next time, guys. Bye-bye.